Not all of our calls are searches. I've said that a couple times recently. A lot of our calls are rescues, but on occasion we get a search, and a search would be the more complicated of our types of missions, the longer lasting, the ones where we regret not doing something from the beginning that we could have done if we had thought it through, because it's quickly develops and gets moving before we really get our arms around everything. And it can become complicated. It can range over a wide swath of terrain and a number of days. These happen in town, and they tend to be quicker, and they happen in the forest, and they've gone on for days. We've been on one in East Bremerton that went on for 4 days or something too. So yeah, they can be complex. So there's a bunch of training requirements here. I'm just skipping through those from the state for what you have to know classroom wise, and then what you have to do in the field. And we're going to practice all this in the field. This will be a big part of like 2 hours or so on that Saturday morning. We'll practice a search, a couple different types of search here. So a couple overviews. Search is an emergency. Search is always also a law enforcement issue until proven otherwise. It's law enforcement's responsible for missing people. And sometimes a search like that one in East Bremerton actually becomes a criminal issue. So it's an emergency, and it's a law enforcement case until proven otherwise. It's a mystery, so we're looking for clues, and we're using the resources of our detectives to do actual detective work and try to narrow down that search. We saw that in Ludlow on that recent search with the cell phone forensics, and that commonly is a part of the detective work that goes into concentrating our efforts. So we want to focus on efforts that are important to the search success, and that last point there is just a small bullet point, but it really should be emphasized. Focus on efforts that are under control of the search manager. They're looking at a map and all this detective work that we don't see, and they're making assignments based on those things. Those assignments have to be done and cleared reliably for them to move on to the next assignment. So don't do stuff that you haven't been assigned, and do stuff well if you have been assigned it. That allows Derek or whoever's running this search to know that their efforts to define the search area and the assignments, they're being matched with our efforts to clear those areas or move on, from search area A to B, and reliably know that we did our job in those areas. So do what they've asked. Some basic ICS goes into this, Incident Command System, and that's why you have to take those IS courses just to understand that there's a structure to incident management, and it's called ICS. The basic things that apply to us are that we check in and out for accountability. We have unity of command, so whoever you are, whatever role you have, you only report to one person. That might be a more experienced SAR person that's running your team, or it might be directly to a deputy. But you only have one person, and then lines of communication should flow to that. So the people you report to, the one person you report to, that should be who you report to by radio, etc. That person, if they're a team leader, should have one person to report to, which is usually back at the base, and they communicate through that line of communication. Everything from radio communication to just off the cuff conversation, everything should flow ideally through those lines of communication. Another ICS concept we covered in the radio session, we use common plain speech. That is slowly changed in the public safety world, especially since 9/11, but it is a foundational element of ICS, that we don't use codes, we use common plain speech. Another ICS issue or concept that we use is span of control. Ideally, one person supervises 5 other people. That's the ICS ideal. The range is allowed to be from 3 to 7 other people. If it's lower than that, there's no reason for a supervisor. If it's higher than that, it's too many people to keep track of. So 3 to 7, 5 is optimal. The more technical the task, the smaller the span of control. So on a tech rescue, you might have multiple supervisors of certain areas of that operation that all roll up into one supervisor of that operation, who himself or herself reports to the IC back at the base. Couple of meetings we should have. This helps define things and helps us evaluate our performance and go on to the next tasking. One is to brief. So before you go out on a mission, you should understand what's going on and what your role is. That might be very simple. It might be over the phone, or it might be real quick at the trailhead if you're one of those hasty responders. But you should have some briefing, not just going up the trail blindly or carrying gear or going up to do a tech rescue blindly. You should understand your role and what's going on. Debriefings when you come back, and that happens sometimes as a small group. In one of these searches, it would be just the group that came back and did, searched an area. They would debrief that and explain to the person they're working for what they searched, show the GPS tracks, how well they think they covered it, etc. Debriefing could also be the whole team, and that on our rescue missions is how it tends to be. It's just the whole team in a circle at the trailhead debriefing. Hot wash, that can be that's our hot wash for that's our circle at the trailhead too. That's usually what amounts to an after action meeting for us, unless it's a major mission, and that's trying to understand how to improve what we do next time, and talk about mistakes we made and things we did well. A couple other ICS things is that there's a public information officer. That might not be a designated person, but on our smaller missions, but it's always somebody that's not you. It's not me either. None of us is the public information officer, but there is a public information officer. In the absence of someone wearing that hat, it's the deputy in charge. Okay, so you don't talk to the family or the media or anyone else outside of your team about what's going on with the mission or what we found or what we haven't found. Okay, direct any media or family that you run into to talk to the person in charge. Search is sort of in 3 stages. These kind of happen simultaneously, depending on the type of call, but we'll talk about each of these stages, but let me go over a little bit. So stage 1, we roll out to somebody missing on a trail. A trail runner didn't come back. Stage 1, we would want to do containment. We want to make sure they couldn't get any further away than what they are. So we'll be at the trailhead blocking that access. We might go to another trailhead where that trail comes out, send someone over there to contain and make sure they don't, get a ride home from there, etc. Try to keep the search area from expanding exponentially, because once you let them out of your box, they could be anywhere in the world. Traction, that's using sirens on vehicles and things to try to bring them home if they're close and they can hear you. And investigation, that's what the detectives are doing simultaneously. So they're interviewing family, friends, they're calling back to that person's home, wherever they're from, and asking that law enforcement agency to go check out their house, make sure they're not there, see if they find any clues, etc. Stage 2, this kind of happens simultaneously with 1, and that's a rapid search. That's sending a pair of people up the trail and just see if we can find them, or up the adjacent trail in case they got turned around, etc. Stage 3, that's where this becomes a lot of work. That's searching segments of ground. A bunch of abbreviations where we start. So the initial planning point, the IPP, is usually we don't even use that term. We usually skip right to the PLS, place last seen. But sometimes it's the LKP, or last known position. So we're at least as good as the federal government with a bunch of acronyms here. What this all boils down to is, where can we reliably know that the person was last? So that might be the last time someone saw them up the trail or something, but it might be the last known position, which could be an inReach ping or a picture that they texted to someone. What it all boils down to is the last known place where we reliably know they were. It might be a clue. It might be the lost, where they left a backpack, etc. From that initial planning point, we establish search areas. We do this in mapping software generally. So here's a theoretical search area. The initial planning point's at the center. So that's where someone's tent was found. Okay, they're not there. We don't know where they went after that. But at least we know that they slept in their tent last night. They were reported to be at that lake, and there's their tent. It's been 2 hours since that, and this is how far they theoretically could walk on flat ground in 2 hours. So you draw a big circle. And we have books that break that circle down into different rings. And these books are based on subject behavior, and Alzheimer's patient would be a good example here. So we have theoretical travel distances per hour for Alzheimer's patients. Same for children that are trying to hide or think they're in trouble, or same for healthy adult trail runners. So we have distances, and within each of those rings, statistically 25, 50, 75% of people with those kind of characteristics are found. Okay, so that can help you break it down. If usually that max, that outer ring is way out. It's 40 miles out. So that's a theoretical, it's max. We're not going to search the entire Olympic Peninsula to start. So we'll start with maybe that 50 or 25% ring, the likely area. Excuse me, my throat's dry. Likely area where they could be found, and we'll use that to narrow down the initial search area. This goes into some of that detail here. So children, different ages, elderly, hikers, hunters, how far in an hour they statistically travel on flat terrain, and then uphill and downhill and mountainous terrain. Finally, all those broad circles on a bunch of topography don't really mean anything in the real world, because you can travel up and over ridges, but who would? It's rare. What you would do is, as a lost subject, is pick the path of least resistance. You pick a flat river valley, pick a trail, you'd pick a road, you pick some way where it's easy to travel, or a clear-cut area. You might go up a avalanche slope or something. So this requires some knowledge of the terrain, and if the search gets to this point, you can trace areas that seem easily traversable around the initial planning point and highlight those for initial looks. So you combine this mess with this nice neat circles of how far someone could travel, and you get something like this. That's our deductive search area. That's where we should be looking first. So 75% of people are found within that range. These are the areas that can easily be traveled from the initial planning point. So that's what we're going to search. That then is where we need to do containment. This is a weird example with a bunch of different containment issues. Generally, you just got a couple trails that exit, and we'd want to do containment at the end of those. But in this case, they've got these 6 areas where they'd want to do containment, because it would be easy to leave the search area at those places. So that's where you'd station somebody if you have the people, or you'd put up some kind of notice. So camp in, that's stationing someone there. So you send someone to the trailhead, and they spend the night. They talk to everyone that comes out that trail and make sure it's not our subject, or they haven't seen our subject. String lines, that's just stringing, flagging across the trailhead with a note on it that says, hey, if you're John Smith, you're missing and we need to know. So here's the phone number to call. So that's an unattended way to do the containment. Track traps, this is a strategy from tracking, where you find areas where a trail crosses some mud and you look for footprints there. You can also use it for containment. If a trail or a road goes into a muddy area or a snowbank or whatever, you can check that periodically for footprints to see if someone's left your search area. Or you can combine these features. So here's another way to look at this. I'll give you a some guidance here with a pointer. So here's the point last seen at the initial planning point. There's a trail that runs here. Sorry, it's a stream bed. So what they did was blocked it here and here with flagging tape or something, so that if the subject had traversed up the stream bed, they would eventually find one of these things and call the number or wait there or whatever. There's 3 trails that leave the initial planning point, so they put blocks here and here. And this one's out of road, so they block the trail and the road there. All right, next, if our hasty search doesn't work, we got to actually divide up this area and start walking it, start gridding it out. We'll get to what grid searches look like in a little bit, but this is what the planning feeds into. So each of those, this area here would be, one search area. Here's another search area, another search area. You just use your brain and topography and break out the search areas into things that make sense and reasonable for a team to search, and then you start assigning those. There's some math involved. Just know that when we all form a line and walk over an area, and we're trying to find a person, so we spread out quite a ways because we're looking for the size of a human laying there. Our probability of detection in that area doing that walk is never 100%. All right, so I mean, we could walk shoulder to shoulder and technically get close to 100%, but that's not realistic most of the time. Usually we're spread out, 50 or 100 feet from each other looking for a person, and maybe they're non-responsive, so they're not going to answer when we yell. Our probability of detection might be 50% or something. Think about all the things that can go wrong with that. They could crawl under a log, they could bury themselves in leaves, they could actually have been killed and buried. Our probability of detection is never going to be 100%, no matter how many times we walk over an area.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead, Jess.
Are there statistics for dogs included, the search dogs?
I don't have those. Yeah, sorry, we just haven't done that deep of training on using search dogs. We've only gone into working with them. My guess is in the canine handlers courses, they go into that stuff.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. A dog can obviously be of help here, though, because if our probability of detection is, 30% because we're so spread out and the brush is thick, and we bring a bloodhound with us, or we're walking behind a bloodhound handler, and they have a fairly high degree of confidence in their dog sniffing out a human in that area, my personal confidence in detection goes up quite a bit. That's why I love having dogs with us on this kind of search. We're really a line of humans looking for another human. It's really low POD. What this boils down to is that the missing person is not in all of these search areas. There's a method for assigning the probability that they're in an area. And then we have a probability of detecting them if they're in that area. And in the end, you get a probability of success. And you can do all this math and try to manage the search by counting these statistics for each area and mapping them. And that's what's going on back at the command post. I'll link the search. Okay, so you're not, sorry for bringing up the next slide already, but just have some confidence that when you're sent out to search the same same piece of ground that another team just looked at, or maybe you looked at earlier, there's a reason for it. Maybe there's a high probability that subject is judged to be in that area, that search area. And because of the terrain and the brush, the probability of detection keeps coming back really low. It's going to take 3 or 4 searches of that area to get the probability of detection close to 100%. It'll never get there, but it'll be close. And so you'll search the same area. You'll be walking on other rescuers' footsteps over and over and over again. And I hate to use this morbid example, but literally the person could be buried in that area. and it's happened to us. So you will keep looking and keep looking until they get that probability of success high enough to move on and search the next area. All right, our bread and butter though for a search is a hasty search. So let's talk about that. This is where we start. This is again back to phase 2 of a search. So while the detectives are doing their thing, we're sending a couple people up the trail. Greater than 50% of missing people are found on some kind of road or trail. So it stands to reason you just send a couple people up the trail and check it out. And this usually works. Take it slow, especially if you're driving. Understand that you're supposed to be listening to. So you got to stop, take it slow, shut your engine off, listen, maybe honk the horn, try to attract them, etc. Ground recon team should consist of 3 members. Often this, for us is just a duo, unless we have someone that's tracking. Okay, so that's a hasty search. You'll see that most often, just run up the trail. Where we need more training though is the stuff that we don't do very often. It's grid searching. So I'm just gonna bring up some points here. You can read them. The last point there, don't rush a grid search. So a grid search is a line of people walking through an area. This can be everything. I'll show some diagrams next. This could be everything from people spread out that 50 or 100 feet looking for a human to we're looking for very small clues and we're going to walk 5 feet apart because we're trying to find everything. We're trying to find the pack of cigarettes or a cigarette butt or the discarded coffee grounds or whatever, you know. The spacing depends on what we're looking for and how big of an area we want to accomplish, what the priority is. All of those types of searches though are grid searches. So don't rush it. The primary objective is to search the area well. And you can go over that with the person assigning your team this task. What kind of probability of detection are you looking for? Do you want 50? Do you want 100? We will space ourselves appropriately. So a couple types of grid searches. The most common would be visual. So we're just looking for something. Visual sweeps are used when the subject isn't going to respond, so we can't use audio. Searchers are spaced close enough together that they can see each other most of the time. They're usually kind of spread out. We'll talk about how far to spread out, but you could talk to each other or yell to each other. At least you could occasionally see the partner left and right of you. And you try to stay in a line. It gets difficult. This is why a grid search should really have a leader floating behind the line, trying to keep everybody lined up as much as possible, because we're trying to cover the area of ground pretty adequately. So here's a small way to do it. Someone has a compass bearing that the search is supposed to take, and they walk in the middle. And then you got one person on the left and one person on the right of them. And those people kind of wander a little bit. The person in the middle keeps their eye on that compass heading and just keeps going. The 2 people on the left or right, they kind of, because they wander left and right of their straight track, they get a little more ground covered. Here's a more serious example. This is multiple teams and we're really trying to find small items that may be clues from the subject. So we flagged lines between the grids, and the 4 teams here, or it might be one team going back and forth, are following that flagging. And this is why it's important to keep everyone in roughly a line and stay together, because you need to cover adequately from the left side to the right side of each of those grids. You need to be able to say that we saw every inch of ground there. You'll see here behind each team is an L. There's the one for the A. That's the leader wandering back and forth. So they kind of keep an eye on keeping everyone aligned to give directions to do that. And then if this one over here finds a cigarette butt, leader will run over there and flag it, stop the team, run over there, flag it, get on the radio, figure out what to do, and then start the team again. And the same, if they have to run over here next time for another clue, they'll run back and forth and help. It works pretty well. I've been on a few of these. It works well, but it takes some coordination. Here's another example: 5 meter spacing between people, leader running around behind them. The number 8 and number 1 ideally would be flagging as they go if it's not flagged already. That is so that they can, that when you flip around or the next team comes behind you, you have a line of flagging to follow to see where you were. You can do it with the GPS too, but it's easier with flagging. Search separation, we'll practice this in the field. Basically, you put something on the ground in the terrain that you're going to be looking at, and then you stand opposite, two people stand opposite each other looking at that object, and they back up until they can't see it anymore. So if you're looking for a backpack, a red backpack, you try to get a red backpack, throw it on the ground in this brush, or whatever it is, the terrain that you're operating in. Two people back up until they can just barely see the red backpack, and then they take a couple steps forward so they can see it. You measure the distance between the two searchers, pace it out, or just, or you could do it with your thumb. You know, visually hold your thumb out at arm's length and see how much of the other searcher it covers. That gives you a guide for how far you should be from your partners, left and right of you. Everyone does that, and or two people do it, and it applies to everyone. Anyway, you get that spacing in the actual terrain you're going to be searching for, or searching with an item similar to what you're trying to find. So if it's a human, all you're looking for is that body or that alive person. Have somebody lay down and in the brush and back up until you can't see them. That becomes your spacing between people. The rough numbers down at the bottom, probability of detection at that spacing is 50%, because again, the subject could be hidden, they could be behind something, under something, etc. If you have that spacing, it can go up to about 75%. If you double that spacing, it's down to 25%. Those are obviously really round numbers, but as a general guide. The other kind of grid sweep is just very widely spacing and using your whistles. Okay? You can do that also as a hasty team, but that's one reason we carry whistles, to signal each other, to start and stop the grid searches, but also just to do sound sweeps for people that are missing. So here's a way to do a sound sweep. Each person, they're spaced out, they're taking turns blowing their whistles. I should note, when someone else is doing a sound sweep, the whole team needs to be on board. Everyone that can hear it needs to be on board. They all need to know over the radio, hey, we're going to start blowing whistles to try to attract the subject. And then when someone does blow their whistle, everyone else needs to be quiet for quite a while, so they can try to hear if there's some kind of faint response. Night searching, I'll just say you need to know how to search at night. The question of whether it is advantageous or a waste of time and effort is up to a discussion with the person running the search. So again, risk versus reward. We're not going to see some stuff at night. Some stuff would be better at night, but for the most part, we're not going to see as well. We're going to hear better. Radios will work okay, but it's more strenuous travel generally, and it's more stressful environment. It's possibly a waste of effort when you could be resting, because you're just not going to see as far or as much. The subject might be sleeping and may not be able to respond to you anyway or hear you if you're far from them. Need a lot of light. Of course, we carry a lot of light, so we could do it. It's just, it depends on the case. But don't be surprised if we, start a search in the middle of the night. Don't also be surprised if we say, hey, this is not effective right now. Let's shut down. Let's come back at first light and start then. Because what we're looking for, we need to actually be able to see to do this right. A couple more slides here. Clue awareness. Make sure that everything you find out there is a clue. If we're on a search, a lot of them might be irrelevant, but the one that you call in, the piece of tissue, that was called in on the Ludlow search a couple months ago, ended up being relevant. So some very small stuff, receipts, cigarette butts, anything that could be tied to that person can be relevant. So we'll do a crime scene awareness class with the sheriff's office probably this summer, and you'll get a little more about this. So I'm just kind of skipping through this for now. There's lots of clues though. The stuff that we'll get from the detectives is number one there. Any information about the subject and what they're going for. Weather, not just currently, but at the time when they were hiking or boating or whatever and got lost, because it can affect not just your ability to find them, but it can affect the actions they would have taken. So it can force them to take cover, for example. People that we find on the trail are almost always good clues. They're either clues that they saw the subject and talked to them or saw them going a certain way at a certain time, or they're clues in that they didn't see the subject. And both of those things are important. Recorded clues, we don't have trail registers anymore, but any kind of notes left, that's notes left at home, notes left with family at home. That's why the sheriff's office does a fair amount of investigation to try to help us out. Event clues would be anything that was heard or any electronic signal received. Physical clues, the obvious ones, the things I've been mentioning. And then tracks or sign. And we have a separate tracking class that Hallie teaches, and some outside resources that we can send people to as well if you're into that. But that's actually doing tracking is a specialty for JSAR. Clue preservation, try not to trample everything is what it comes down to. The last point there, searchers with limited training should stay out of an area with high potential for clues until it's been searched thoroughly by trackers. If we're going to bring trackers in, or if we're going to bring dogs in, which I think is, sorry, this is all messed up. The next one here, trackers or dogs ideally get first access to an area before we go and trample it. Some dogs, that's important. Some dogs that are responding to a particular scent, it's not important, but it depends on the type of dog that we get in response to a request. Anyway, if we anticipate dogs being used, we might still do a hasty search on the trail, but we maybe defer all of the off-trail work until we can get dogs into those areas. Same with trackers. We might send hasty searches up the trail and back down the trail all day long, but we might keep everyone on the trail so that trackers can look for places that someone left the trail and leave that stuff undisturbed. You're always going to have to interview people on any kind of search. Even on a rescue, we end up interviewing people because we want to know, people coming down the trail that we meet, we want to know, did you encounter the subject? Where were they? How far do I have to go? What's the latest you know about their condition? So that's important even for a rescue. On a search, it's doubly important. So a couple of important things here. Interview everyone. Identify yourself and be nice. Explain basically what you're doing. Ask them to describe anything that they've seen. You don't need to give them the full details, but you could show them a picture. We generally have a picture of the subject at or around the time that we go up the trail. And take notes. So you should have a notebook for patient care and for this kind of thing. Take notes and document and relay that stuff back to base by radio, then give them your notes when you get back. Also encourage the subject. I think it's, sorry. Avoid putting words in their mouth. Time and locations are essential. Direction of travel is essential. Any other kind of information that you think could be helpful, don't just get it from them, but write it down and relay it on the radio so that the people investigating, the detectives, have that information. We're not just looking for people, we're looking for their tent or their abandoned gear or anything else. So ask about that stuff as well. And then encourage the person to go stop by the ICP when they get off the trail and be interviewed by a law enforcement professional who does this for a living. Because they may, number one, get more information out of them that you didn't think to ask about. And number two, probably have it documented more clearly down there than you were able to relay over the radio. But thank them for their assistance. Everything they did was helpful to you, even if they said they didn't see a subject. So thank them and send them down the trail if possible to go to the ICP. Okay, a couple other things. Keep your mind focused on the search. Move slowly. It's hard to find clues while you're rushing around. It's also hard to find clues while you're uncomfortable. So be honest about that. Keep your team and yourself fresh and take a break if you have to. Use all your senses, including looking, mostly using your eyes, but use your senses too, the rest of them. With your eyes, look up and down. So look at the ground around you. Look up in the trees. There's a fair number of our cases that end up with someone in a tree. So always look there, and also look to the rear. So make a very deliberate attempt every 15 or 20 steps, depending on what kind of terrain you're in, to actually spin around and look back the way you came. You'll notice stuff that you wouldn't have seen. You'll also become more familiar with what the terrain looks like going back the other way, which is a good way to keep yourself from getting lost. But yeah, you want to do that just to make sure you see everything from every direction. Look for places that would attract people, such as caves and buildings. Try to stay mentally positive. Inform the team when you're not. Okay, so when you're getting fatigued, the team needs to stop and take a break, because an ineffective search just to get it done, just to press on, is more damaging to the effort than a delay required to stop, eat, drink, chill out, and get your mind focused again before you go on. Okay, so take that time, know your limitations, and take that seriously. Take it as seriously as just finishing the assignment. Don't just rush through. Don't chat unnecessarily while you're doing this. Try not to get distracted from the search.